So there are all sorts of marketing tactics that you can do that are out there, and SEO is just one of them. SEO meaning search engine optimization and how to get more organic reach to your website. So today I have a guest, Eli Swartz, who's joining me to talk about SEO and how to make the most of it, but most importantly, if it's even the right tactic for you to be doing right now, which I think is a really important topic because not all things are the right things for us to be doing. And I talk about this a lot, right? How to add in benefits, how to test your marketing, how to make sure you know what's working and what's not. So that is what we are going to talk about in today's episode. Eli Swartz, an SEO expert and consultant with more than a decade of experience working for leading B2B and B2C companies, has the ability to demystify and navigate the SEO process and has generated billions of dollars in revenue for some of the internet's top websites, including such clients as Shutterstock, WordPress, Blue Nile, Quora, and Zendesk. His new book is Product-Led SEO, The Why Behind Building Your Organic Growth Strategy. Now, before you say, well, I'm not a product-based business, this isn't going to be for you, I promise he gives you a way to think about your business that can turn it into a product-based business. So listen to this episode, take it in, think about how this might play into your overall marketing strategies and if it's something you're ready to tackle or maybe something to tackle in future months to come. But either way, it was a great conversation and I think you'll learn a lot about how to really think about SEO and how we do it in our businesses. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by our website Wednesdays. These are free, quick workshops with an actionable step you can take on your website. They take place on the third Wednesday of every month. And so to see which is the upcoming topic that we'll be talking about this month, head on over to thefirstclick.net/website-Wednesday. There's no registration needed. All you need to do is be on my email list to get the link in order to show up. There's no pitch. And I have a freebie at the end of every single 30-minute session if you stick around to the end. So again, thefirstclick.net/website-Wednesday. Let's get into the episode. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern, and each week I bring you tips from myself and other experts, as well as hot seats with small business owners and entrepreneurs to demystify digital marketing and get you on your way to generating more leads and growing your business. Hey everybody, please welcome Eli Swartz to the podcast. Eli, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So before we kind of kick things off and get into some actionable stuff, why don't you tell me why SEO? Why is this kind of the game changer for you and something you think is super important for our marketing strategies?
Yeah, I have to be honest, it may not be. I differentiate myself by telling a lot of people not to do SEO. So I think what it comes down to is SEO is a marketing channel like any other marketing channel. And if you choose to do SEO, it should only be because you have people that are looking for you on search. And that's what SEO is. You're optimizing for this channel of people going to search engines and clicking organic results. In many cases, they're not. In many cases, there's no audience whatsoever, and people shouldn't do SEO. Now, assuming that SEO matters to you and you do have people on organic search clicking and looking for you, SEO is a game changer because the search engines create algorithms which are designed, and I think it's a plural search engines, not just Google. They create algorithms which are designed to help understand what users are looking for, but also to understand what the content is on the website so they can match that to what the users are looking for. Now, where this gets a little interesting is those algorithms do these things on their own. So you can get search traffic even if you close your eyes and don't do any SEO, but why would you leave that to chance? So SEO is really just this process of optimizing. You get in a car, a new car you haven't driven before. You want to adjust the seat, adjust the steering wheel, adjust the mirrors. You could drive the car without it, but why would you? So approach SEO the same way. If people are coming and searching for you, and this is a channel that's going to be effective for you, why wouldn't you optimize? Now, obviously, there's a long continuum of just do a couple things to let's really spend a lot of money on this channel, but it starts there. Why wouldn't you optimize if this is a channel that's important for you?
I love that car analogy because I think that makes so much sense. Well, and most of our listeners are nonprofits and they have access to the Google Ad Grant, which can like beef up your search visibility much faster. And so today, for the purpose of this conversation, talking about SEO with regards to content and why creating content matters. So how, like, if we've been creating content, I kind of want to hit this in two ways. If we've been creating content already, but we haven't been doing any SEO stuff behind it, like where might we want to start with that?
So it really comes down to users and what users are looking for. So if you're creating content and you haven't created the content for users, don't create content. If you're creating the content and you're creating the content for users, the next step is really understanding what it is that the users are looking for and incorporating those words into the content. But more than that, incorporating those words into the titles of the content, because that's how it's going to appear on search. So the same way when, we all as regular users of search discovering things online, the same way we go and Google something or Bing something or DuckDuckGo something, and we see a bunch of search results, and one of those search results says nothing here or no title or title missing, we're not going to click because it's not interesting to us. We don't know what's there. That's what you're really optimizing for. And the search engines are looking for the same thing. And it's not that, for any SEO advice you've heard in the past, you have to use a specific word. If you don't use that word, you're not doing SEO. Or you have to use the word in this specific order. If you don't do the word in this specific order, you're going to be outranked by someone who's doing it better than you. And that's not the case whatsoever. There was a site that I recently saw in the luxury goods space. Luxury goods like Gucci and Louis Vuitton, Bergdorf, like these are all things that they have a big issue with infringement. And these companies will go and search online and find people that are infringing their copyrights and making fake designer bags and fake designer goods. So the sites that are making these fakes, they do a good job of hiding by not using the copyright and saying, well, it's not really a Louis Vuitton bag. It's not really a Gucci bag. I just called it an LV bag, or an L, star V bag. And, maybe to Louis Vuitton that works. But if you were to go and search that, it would actually be ranking on search results for Louis Vuitton, even though they haven't even used those words. They are able to get links which use those words, or the search engines have figured out that L star V, when people want that, that's actually Louis Vuitton. So you really don't need to go to that distance of like, well, make sure if you're using the word, you have to use the exact word people look for, or make sure that if the people are looking for the plural version of the word, use the plural and not the singular. So I know that I'm making it harder for some people by saying this, that like there's not a lot you need to do for SEO, but I'm also making it a lot easier because there's not a lot of things you need to do for SEO.
So is it all about kind of defining what that core topic keyword is, but then still using it in a conversational way regularly throughout your content?
Not so much anymore. So I would find the core topic that users are looking for, and then try to incorporate the words they use because those are the words they use. But if you don't use the words they use, like anybody that's ever visited a doctor and the doctor has given you like a report and they tell you, oh, you have all these things. I've noticed all these things. And you're like, oh, is this bad? And then you go and search those terms and they were just telling you that you have a runny nose, but they don't use the word runny nose. That's the idea. It's like, use the words that your customers and your users are using. They're using those in search engines. They're using them in conversations. So use those words. Now, if you don't use those words correctly, that doesn't matter that much. I would just use those words because it will resonate more with users. The algorithms are trying to figure out the synonyms. The algorithms are trying to figure out the context, even if you don't use those words.
So how do we go about finding those words?
So the simplest way to find those words is to understand your users and to understand your audience. Now, if you don't really understand your users and understand your audience, we'll go figure that out, of course. But if you need a little guidance on doing that, the simplest thing to do is to go into Google and type the topic that you're looking for and see what Google suggests as related queries. I love when you type in, and Google will also carry forward anything that you've already been doing. So say you're looking for a movie to watch and you're like me, you're obsessed with only watching movies that get a high score on IMDb because you don't want to waste time but discovering that the movie was terrible. You just want to let other people think the movie is great. So you type in the name of a movie. Now, interesting things about movies is they're very generic terms, like long night, the fun day, right? Like they're very generic. But if you type in the name of a movie and then you add in the word movie, now all of your next queries, which are very generic, like the longest yard, there's a lot of things that can have the longest yard.
Right.
The word frozen, or Top Gun, right? Like all those things are now going to bring up movie results. So it's not about the words, it's really about the context and the topic that you're searching for. So if you don't understand your users, or you just don't understand users in this context, you can go into Google and type and see what else Google suggests. You could scroll a little bit down and there's things that it says people also ask. So these are other queries that people are looking curious about. And then you could go all the way to the bottom and it'll give you related queries. And that will give you a ton of ideas of like, these are my users. Now, Google's not perfect. And sometimes you're looking for a movie and Google's suggesting music. So you can ignore those suggestions. And then the third thing you can do, so again, one is talk to users, two is go on Google. Third thing you can do is just use a keyword research tool. And there are a number of them, and they're very, very similar. So you can use Google's keyword planner. So your listeners are using Google's advertising. That means they have access to Google Keyword Planner, and Google Keyword Planner will just help give ideas. I wouldn't necessarily trust the numbers that Google gives, but it does normalize and give you a directional sense of this. People search this more than that, and maybe it'll show you some seasonality. There's other tools like SEMrush or Ahrefs that will, you can just dive in and get ideas. But I wouldn't necessarily say, well, I need to go and, I'm married to this word because the tools told me that. Again, be married to what your users want.
I think that's important because there is an element of SEO that is all about user experience and user interaction with your website. So if you just go keyword specific and develop all the content on your website for that, but your website isn't actually serving those people, that can actually negatively impact you.
Exactly. So it's one of the things I see all the time in my consulting. And I talk to a lot of companies who they think SEO is this silver bullet. They reach out to me because they want me to provide that silver bullet for them. And it's not, because they don't first understand that their users are using search. If you're in a B2B space, your users might not be using search because that's not the way they find tools. If you're in the nonprofit space and you're focusing on donors with your SEO, that's probably not where you're going to be finding new donors. Anybody that's in nonprofits know that the best way to find donors is probably by networking and doing actual conversations and outreach. Whereas if you're in the nonprofit space and you're looking to service a particular demographic, that's probably where you are going to find people searching. Someone is looking for a support group to be connected to. Someone is looking for a shelter to adopt and foster dogs. Like, that's where search matters. So really understand, do you have that search audience or do you not have that search audience? If you don't have that search audience, there is no silver bullet that can really help you with SEO. This is not a channel where the more you spend, the more you return at all.
So then when we think about our content marketing, because that's where I think a lot of people get stuck, is I don't have time to blog on a regular basis, or I don't have time to do all this stuff. Kind of, how often should websites be adding new blog posts or content to their website if they have an SEO strategy in order to kind of see that consistent income? And again, I know there's no silver bullet, there's no specific timeline, but how much effort and time should they put into a content strategy before they kind of test if it's working for them or not?
So if you're creating content for the right audience, there's an audience there, I would never even check to see if it's working, because that assumption is probably correct, which is, I know that my users need to understand this. I know that this is going to teach them something. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to measure the specific outcomes from this content. Again, say it's you're in the nonprofit space and you're trying to help people find services. It's very unlikely that the content alone is what convinced them to contact you. You need to build trust. You need to build a relationship. It's very possible that something else helped them go down that road and someone introduced them to your nonprofit. So if you're looking for specific returns of, this piece of content converted all these people, it's probably not going to happen. Now, you can obviously do an A/B test. You can rip out the content and say, does the quality of the conversations we're having, does the quality of people coming through a flow change? Probably it will. Well, why would you do that? If you have this gut feel that the content is good and people like it and that's how they understand you and it comes up in conversation, then it's working for you.
Yeah. So it's about kind of testing multiple types of things and then just kind of paying attention to what is coming up within the conversations you're having, both via your website and also kind of in person at the networking things. Because like you said, I agree with you 100% that you're not going to put up a blog post that's like all the reasons to donate to our organization and that's going to drive money. How your content is going to drive revenue to your organization is by the products and services that you provide and just getting people to dive deeper and making you that kind of expert. So what are kind of some of the big mistakes or things that you see people spend too much time on with SEO that just don't matter?
The biggest one is really not understanding users. And then they don't understand their users, so then they're focused on these keywords. And they write a bunch of content towards these keywords. So I think that's a twofold issue. Issue number one is the content's not useful for users. Issue number two is the goal around the content that they're writing is to rank on a keyword. And in most cases, that's not really possible. So say someone, had to have a dog shelter and the keyword they're focused on is dog shelter and they're looking at the rankings around dog shelter. It's highly unlikely that you will ever be number one for that keyword dog shelter. So I wouldn't put my focus there whatsoever. So that's really the biggest mistake people make. And I'd say around that, again, builds upon this. If you don't have this SEO strategy, you're going to be making mistakes after mistake. They'll focus on specific tactics without really thinking about how those tactics ladder into strategy. A tactic might be the keywords you put in your title tag. That's just a tactic. And if it doesn't ladder into strategy, if this is who this content is created for, this is the user that should be reading it and engaging and acting on this content, what you put in the title tag doesn't matter. It's just a tactic. It's not focused on anything. The same goes with how you interlink your site and which pages link to other links. If you're doing it to trick an algorithm, but it doesn't really align with what you're trying to do with your site, no point in that. And then the third thing on that is, and again, a lot of people are familiar with this around SEO, which is building links. So big mistake people make with building links is that they think that a link alone is valuable, and that's not really the case. So the way they think is, I got a link from an authoritative website. And what's interesting is, your audience is nonprofits, and nonprofits have this ability to get a lot of great links from the media, especially if they are able to tug at certain heartstrings. The journalists in the media want to talk about them. Those are links, but not all links are built equal. So the way that search engines, and we'll use Google in this case because they're the ones that invented it, the way that Google looks at links is they look at them in context. And the way they invented this, and it's important to keep in mind that they invented this 22 plus years ago, like before 2000, they invented this concept that links help understand the authority of a content. In 22 years, when they invented this thing, people didn't even have computers, let alone used Google. And now we have computers in our pocket and self-driving cars and all the innovations we have and, rings that can measure our heart rate. Like the world has changed. And somehow when it comes to links, people approach it like they did 22 years ago. It's like, I want an authoritative link from an authoritative website. So they focus on these links and the metrics around the links of like, that's a good link because it comes from a media site. That's a good link because it comes from a .edu, an educational site. Never mind the fact that it comes from a student's personal blog that has no visibility on the internet. So they focus on those wrong metrics. So I would just ignore that entire concept of links and really think about PR. Like, how do I get the message out about what I do? And do they include a link in that? So is it an article about what I do in the media and there's a link to it? That's great, because even if the search engines and Google decide that link really doesn't matter from a search standpoint, however, people read that article and now they're more aware of what you do, that's good, right? So I would drive towards that. So I think that's, the final big mistake I see people make when it comes to SEO really all comes down to the same thing, not having an overarching goal for their SEO efforts.
There's so many good things that you said there. And I think that the term authority is something that we're all ingrained in with SEO, right? Like we need to build authority and trust with the search engines. But I think the thing that you said is it's really about building authority and trust with our users, because if we can continue to build that, then that's going to continue to generate traffic to our website. That's also going to continue to generate that referral traffic of people sharing our information with their friends and family. So I think what you're saying is we think about SEO so much from like the robot perspective, But it's more and more moving to, we have to think about it from our users. And like you've mentioned so many times, how are we trying to talk to the right people? Because if we're not doing that, then it doesn't matter what else we do.
Absolutely. And I think that's, another new thing that's, has come up in the content space is AI written content. Like it's this like secret magic sauce of like, we're going to have AI written content and it's going to use GPT-3 and it's using these new technologies. It forgets the fact that we're writing towards users. So if you're trying to talk to users, but a computer's writing it, what's the point? You're lacking any of the real, like, yes, you can create a lot of scale of content and it's cheap. And I saw a great tweet the other day is, if you expect a $10 piece of content to sell to $1,000 an hour person, then you're completely misguided. So like that's the idea. There's no real secret here. It's really around users and speaking to the users and not taking shortcuts, because the shortcuts aren't shortcuts in the end anyways.
Well, I think that's so true. So like if you, I mean, I kind of asked this in a different way earlier, but like, I know you mentioned like we don't necessarily need to measure great content if we're talking to the right people, which I agree with. And I think if you are then running Google ads to do that great content that's talking to the right people, that will be measurement enough for you. But consistency is key here. And so like, I mean, we need to continue to do this. Like this is a long-term strategy for like the overall growth and viability of our organization. Don't you think? Like it's not like a one and done quick thing that we're just going to like pop some things up. We're going to get some organic search and then we're going to go on our merry way.
Yes, absolutely. So this is a long-term strategy and it's an iterative strategy, which means that you're going to do something and make a hypothesis around something, and you want to make sure that you build upon it and learn from it and keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of what key, like, so if we've already been doing this core content stuff and we're doing all of the things that you've talked about, kind of what is the next step from there? Like what would we do next? Or is it just kind of what you talked about and just being consistent with that?
Being consistent is really important, but really it depends how you're doing SEO. So say you have an outcome that you want to be the largest nonprofit in the world at a certain space. So you want to lay out the plans of how to reach that. And that shouldn't be 2 weeks worth of work. That should be an 18-month plan, a 2-year plan. So what comes next after 2 years? Well, you have 2 years to really continuously learn and figure out what's the end of the 2 years. So it's not one and done. Like it could be one and done if you just need to slap up a homepage and one piece of content about what you do. But if you should have bigger goals than that, no one wants to say, well, I started this nonprofit. It's just going to kind of run itself and I'm going to hang out at the beach. Like You're motivated by something.
We wish.
And you want to have this longer view. And there's a number of things that get you to that longer view. So I typically work with larger businesses where things don't happen very quickly. So we need to lay things out and say, what are we going to do in Q4 to achieve this goal that we have for the end of 2023? Based on what we're going to do in Q4, that defines what we need to be doing in Q3, because we need to build this foundation that allows us to do the Q4 work. And that Q4 work sets us up for success at the end of next year.
I love that. And that kind of leads me to the final thing I wanted to make sure we chatted about, which was we started this conversation with if you are already creating content. So if we're a newer organization, or maybe we've been around a while, but we haven't started creating regular content or doing any sort of SEO strategies, is there anything that we would want to take in mind as a brand new organization versus somebody who's been at it for a while and now trying to add in an SEO strategy?
So I think that someone who is newer at this is a lot smarter, because they're not going to waste as much time with doing the wrong kind of SEO. So I would say if you're newer at this marketing effort, you have a brand new nonprofit, brand new business, you could probably ignore SEO for the time being, because SEO it's a long-term effort. In many cases, it could take a year, 18 months. And I know probably some people have talked to SEO agencies and they say, 2 to 3 months, you'll see results. you'll 2-3 months, you'll see inklings of like, oh, this is working. This is a good idea. But if you have this goal of like, well, I want to be servicing this amount of people, or I want to be selling to this amount of people, that's probably not going to happen before a long time. So that's when I would take a pause on SEO and say, well, I've started this nonprofit, I've raised this money, flip back around. And that's when you're going to use your Google money and you're going to run ads and try to scale that way, because now you're building that user base and you're learning from that user base. And that will define what you want to do from an SEO front. And I see this all the time when I talk to businesses, especially startups. They don't really understand the emotion and the user and why they convert. So it's hard to say, oh, let's build an SEO strategy for what we think is the right thing without any data. But when you use these other channels like paid marketing channels or other advertising channels, now you get users in, you have more of the instant gratification of like, this is the thing that works. And this is why users come back to us. And this is why customers buy from us. And now you could build SEO around that rather than this is the idea I came up with, with my team in a meeting. And this is our 18-month SEO effort. Because what would be terrible is to build for that 18-month SEO effort and the end of 18 months and say, you know what, we made a mistake. Now you're 18 months.
Yeah. Well, and I think I like what you're saying too, in that at the beginning of your organization, I've been in business for just over 5 years, and I have gone through 3 or 4 iterations of what it is that I'm, what I'm targeting and it's been a learning process. So at the beginning of your business, you think you know who you're going after, but you really have to learn and develop and figure that out. So I like what you're saying, the honesty in that of give it a minute and just see what's happening and then really put your effort into it. And I know that the 18 months might scare people. But I hope that what you're doing is not a hobby. It's a business that you're trying to create and you want to be in business for the long term. And so there's strategies that we implement. I think nonprofits tend to get into this reactive mode all the time. I think one of the things that I love about SEO is it is a proactive, ongoing strategy to help with the sustainability of your business.
Exactly. Yes. This is a long-term effort, and it should be something that you only focus on because it's the right thing, and don't guess, and don't do it because someone told you to do it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your honesty and your transparency. Eli, if there was any last takeaway or something that I didn't ask you about in this episode about SEO that you just think people need to hear about, what would that be?
So I've said a lot about what people should be doing and why they shouldn't do SEO. And obviously I wrote a book, and that's why we're having this conversation. So my focus and what I love doing with companies is doing something I call product-led SEO, which is when you take this concept of what a user is looking for and you scale that up into a product on its own. So you're taking information, and instead of, we talked a lot about manual content and the things that people need to do to create content for a specific topic and a specific user. But what if there's something that you see over and over again, and now you can create a product on its own to allow people to get information? So bringing this over to nonprofits, which is not typically the conversation I have, but say there's no good website that exists that help people understand where are the shelters in every single city across America if there's a natural disaster. I can't even imagine what website would have that. That becomes a product on its own. So you figure out all the inputs of where do you need to get that information. Is it the Red Cross? Is it every city government? Is it every state government? I don't even know. Is it a list of every public school that exists in every city? And that becomes a product. And the search terms around that is not where do I go if there is a tornado in the city of Chicago, and I'm going to write a long blog post about that. The product is where do I go if there is A in the city of B? And now you're building a product. And that's the kind of consulting I do. And that's what I really wrote my book around, which is that's what SEO is for. This is a use case that should be addressed from a scaled perspective, from a product standpoint. The example I use in my book, which is not a nonprofit, of course, is Zillow. Right? So Zillow builds this product of understanding home valuations. They scaled it across the entire country. They don't do marketing and advertising to each individual page, 1, 2, 3 Main Street. They built something that fits the use case of, I want to know what the valuation of this home on that block in this city is. And I think that exists for many, many spaces. So if someone has understood there is a large base of people looking for that at the specific thing that they do, and they can scale it up, there's a massive amount of potential, and this is the only way to do it. And you're really addressing a huge need. The example I gave around shelters, that's an obvious need. The example I gave around what's the likelihood of a natural disaster happening in blank. Now you can get that for every city in the country. And you can feed that in from all different data sets. Now you're creating a product that doesn't exist, and you can service a larger audience with your SEO. And if you're looking for donors, and if you're looking for people to service, that's how they're finding you. So we talked a lot about content, but if there is an opportunity in your space to really do that, and this is this could take you 2 years before you really have full penetration, but it's a wide open space because no one else is addressing it if that's something you've identified.
So it's how do I take the problem that I solve and turn it into a formula that is scalable in a search term, like a fill in the blank Mad Libs kind of thing.
Exactly, but not AI written content. It's
no. Yes.
Yeah. I've heard it referred to as Mad Libs. It is sort of Mad Libs, but the content itself is useful. You want to know that if you're putting out a list of public schools in every city that could be a shelter, you want to base that information. And if anybody out there is listening to it and wants an idea, you could actually take all the voting locations where people vote in every city, and you can use that to qualify as could those also become shelters. That's a list that already exists. But again, the harder this is to build, the messier this is, the better product you have the potential building because it scares everyone else away.
That's a good point. And like you said, not something that's super saturated. Well, Eli, I think you've given us a lot of great things to think about with how we choose or choose not to do SEO right now. I love your transparency around that. If people want to find out more about you, how do they do that?
So you can search me on search engines, Google in particular, but you can find my LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect to anybody, accept all LinkedIn connections. Of course, check out my book on Amazon. My book, if SEO is not for you, then this will be the only SEO investment you ever have to make. So I love that. I want people to not do SEO if it doesn't make sense for them to not to create content, not to have the wrong expectations. And then my personal site is eliswartz.co.
I love it. And we'll link up everything in the show notes at thefirstclick.net/158. So you can check everything out there as well. Well, Eli, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sammy.
Well, what'd you think? Are you going to be implementing SEO into your strategies, beefing it up, or taking a pause for a little bit? I got a lot of perspective from this episode as well. And so always love that I get to learn some new things alongside you. If you loved this episode, make sure you subscribe and rate us wherever you listen. We appreciate it. Or share it with somebody that you think might be able to benefit from the topic today. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.